So growing up, we tried a lot of churches and went to a lot of places, as a lot of people do when they're searching for something. They're wanting to see what's out there. But my family growing up, we always had the knack of attracting the weirdest people. And we went through this period where we met a bunch of separatists, sovereign citizens, if you will. I learned a bunch about these guys, and they're nuts. But they're nuts for all the right reasons. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not endorsing this because I see them on TikTok, I see them on YouTube. These people are 100% wrong. The old school way was all these people really wanted to do. They wanted to live within the law. They just wanted to be left alone to their own devices way out in the woods somewhere. And all they wanted to do was be left alone. And yes, some of them had cars and stuff like that. But, it's not as bad and not as stupid as you see now. For some reason, there's always been, and this has always been the case, I've noticed, is there's an extraordinary amount of these people that seem to come from Ohio. I don't know what it is about Ohio. But there's kind of two subcategories in this group. The people that just want to live alone in peace, and the people who are hiding from somebody, usually the law. And it creates a real eclectic bunch. They're kind of like Mennonites. Us from the outside, you see an Amish or a Mennonite, you all just assume it's one or the other. But there's, just like everything else, there's clans, there's sects, and it gets a little goofy. But the problem that you kind of have is that these people, when they get backed into a corner, they fight. Well, the old school ones did. Randy Weaver was one of those. He got set up, and they came after to arrest him. It came over a shotgun barrel that was 3/4 of an inch too short. Yeah, and the government sold him the gun. It's one of those things that when you're sawing down a shotgun, it's an honest mistake. So after killing his wife, his dog, and his son, and then arresting him, and thankfully the news was out there because they were getting ready to burn him out, he sues the federal government, and what you never heard on the news was he actually won. That's one extreme case of a sovereign citizen, a guy just wants to be left alone. The other case are the guys we see on TikTok. The I'm just traveling people. No, it's not illegal to travel, but you can't do it on a taxpayer-funded road in a car that's a privilege to drive. That's just the way it's set up. I didn't make the rules. People are driving around with no tags, no insurance, a homemade sovereign citizen license plate. Actually, they probably bought it on the web, which I also find ironic because, that's another whole story. Sovereign citizens on the web. That fuels a lot of delusion right there. And then they want to, karate fight the cop. It's a trailer park showdown. So, growing up around these people, I understand why they are the way they are. But at the same time, you tend to think, maybe you ought to dial it back a little bit, because a lot of times, these guys are sitting there fighting fights, like for property and stuff like that, using antiquated laws that have already been rewritten, revoked, redacted, or something else. Because I remember a story about a guy, they wouldn't give him access to his property, which is actually illegal. He's fighting the wrong, he had the right idea, but he was fighting the wrong fight. He wanted to cite this old law from 1850 when all he had to do was get a lawyer in about 10 minutes and he would have got access to his property. They literally refused to give him access. It was just, and so, you know, they're kind of like, sometimes they act like Mennonites with better cars. Of course, these new buggies coming out, you know, that's another story about all these people won't have cars, but they were trying to find God's loophole. Doesn't make any sense to me either. Yeah, can't have a car, but your buggy can have an AM/FM radio and cup holders. Whatever. But, you know, this was just what we dealt with. And, like I said, so when you start thinking about sovereign citizens, you know, most of the time, the news has it wrong. There's sovereign citizens, there's separatists, there's white separatists. Don't make out, because they're not part of the Aryan Brotherhood, but then they start getting looped into that. And because the people don't know the difference between separatist and supremacist. And then there, like I said, there's just a whole other subgroup, you know, when you start breaking it down, and it gets pretty convoluted. So pay your taxes and don't do drugs, kids.